Hi guys, I'm here with RC Scott and Sako. We are going to have a fun chat about comic books. If you guys want to just tell me a little bit about yourselves. I mean, I know you guys, but the people watching don't know you. Sako, you go first.
Oh, okay.
Ha ha ha.
Howdy, neighbors. I'm Sako Tumi. I've been reading comics since I was knee high to a grasshopper. My specialty is X-Men and Vertigo, and uh, that means I've been at this for 35 years.
Okay, and RC?
Hello, creeps. This is RC Scott. I'm an indie horror writer, and I wouldn't say I have any base speciality when it comes to comic books, maybe other than Batman. But I have been reading since I was about 5 years old when I grabbed my first stack of comics, which is Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, and all that lovely EC stuff from back in the day, pre-Comics Code. But yeah, from the late '80s, '90s, and all that stuff, I kept it mixed. DC, Marvel, Dark Horse, Vertigo, of course. It's probably like my main. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I know too many people that can just quote issue after issue of certain things happen. I can't go that far, but I've read a lot, a lot.
It's pretty awesome. You guys kind of did my first question. I was going to ask like how you guys started collecting comic books or reading comic books, or maybe your impressions for being when you were younger, when you read comic books. What was that like?
Oh, I am a product of the cartoon show.
Nice.
So when Fox released like X-Men the cartoon, like I was like, this is the best thing ever. And then my mom's friend who collected X-Men, she was like, actually, that's based on this comic from the 1960s. And here's all the comics that the comic, the cartoon show was based on. And I was like, this is amazing. This is so much better than the cartoon. Holy shit.
Yeah.
For me, it was the cartoons. But for earliest memory, I'd have to, because I'm old, I'd go with the Super Friends, the Hanna Barbera. That was like my first introduction. Well, he was either that or the Adam West Burt Ward TV series back in the day. That was my first like introduction to superheroes. Then like came the old Fleischer Superman animated serials from back in the day. I caught some of those. I actually found it this what was it? It was like arts and crafts store when I was a kid. They had this huge vinyl bin, and they had like all this the radio talkies for like Spider Man, like when it first came out, like the Incredible Hulk, like those radio series like back in the day. But it was that, and then around this is all around the same time. The 1989 Batman movie with Michael Keaton. That's what got me into it. Then, like, not too long after that, I was at a garage sale. My brother came with a huge stack of books in there. I don't. He went to go read them for himself, and I remember him like after a couple of days not getting into it, and I snuck into his room and started pulling shit out. And yeah, there was EC stuff. Vault of Horror, Tales from the Crypt, stuff like that. Two Fists Tales, that old World War II book. That got me started on that, and then from there it was Batman, the early '90s stuff. I can't remember who did that. So I think it was like Archie Goodwin was working on that in the '90s. But anyways, it was there. Then it was X-Men, of course. But with X-Men, I slightly knew about them before the show came out in the '90s because while I was looking like for Batman stuff, my brother would show me that, and he'd be like, "Hey, look, that guy can shoot laser out of his eyes." I'm like, "That's awesome. That's not dark and evil enough for me." And then the show came out. I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute, these guys are kind of cool. Look, that guy shoots claws out of his fists. Awesome." And that's what I remember. I grabbed an issue of that when I went back to the comic book shop, and an issue of Alien versus Predator because I was like fairly new at the time, and I think that was Dark Horse. But that's how my journey started, and that was also like how I got into reading. I didn't get into like prose reading until I was like my late teens. That's my story.
Yeah, all of our stories are mine is kind of similar to both of yours, actually. So I think we're all close to the same age. So maybe it's just something that, yeah, that our age group kind of went through. Definitely the animation, but also like the Batman movies. I remember seeing those and being like, Batman is really cool. And then the Batman animated series as well. I used to watch
Yes.
that sometimes because they had it on repeat.
Have you watched it recently?
I haven't, but I would like to rewatch it because I really like Mark Hamill. So
It hasn't aged a bit. It is still amazing.
I've heard, I mean, I've seen people talking about how it's just still amazing. Okay. Next one was what are your favorite comic books or your favorite title? Maybe your very favorite?
Oh,
You
wow.
can name a couple. I know it's kind of hard to pick like a number one favorite.
I grew up on the first 4 books of ElfQuest. That
Yes.
those were my mom's comics, so I was reading those before I could read like text. So like ElfQuest will always hold a special place in my heart. Um Otherwise, I really like Kabuki by David Mack and Sandman and all the stuff that kind of like came from that.
Good choices.
Favorite book? Well, when it comes to characters, IPs, and all that in comic books, my favorite's Batman. Who's also my favorite in all of fiction, pretty much. I mean, when it comes to Batman, everyone loves Dark Knight Returns, Year One, and all that jazz. It's great, but personally, I prefer the old Denny O'Neil books from the '70s, like that run he did with Neil Adams. But number one favorite, I'd have to go back to the one that got me to want to be a writer, and that would be the Alan Moore's run on the Saga of the Swamp Thing.
Good choice.
Yeah. Okay. The next one was you guys kind of talked about this, but maybe your favorite character or group?
Blue Team, Uncanny X-Men. The Go Backs from ElfQuest. And the Endless.
Damn, I was gonna say the Endless from but it's funny you mentioned ElfQuest. I just read the first book of that like a couple of years ago. That was really good.
It
It
is.
was like that married couple that did it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
the
Wendy.
Peonies.
The
Peony?
yeah, the Peonies. Yeah, Wendy and
Well,
it's mostly Wendy that works on the book.
I think she
I
does
think
the art and most of the story, and her husband kind of helps out with the story, if I remember correctly.
yeah, I just can't remember his name at the moment.
I don't know how to draw. I mean, I do, but not well. So I could imagine like drawing a comic and like doing the dialogue and all that jazz and getting it down to the panels. But anyways, team. Well, I've already mentioned the character. I'm trying to think of a good team. I mean, I like Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, that iteration of it. But in recent memory, DC Rebirth, when James Tynion was writing Detective Comics and his interpretation of the Bat family, it was Orphan, all of them. Clayface became part of the Bat family and was like good for a while, but that was so well written, and that was probably like the last great thing to come out of DC before what it is now.
Speaking of DC, I saw that they announced some big thing yesterday, but I don't know what it was. It's the 2nd of February, just for reference.
That's why I heard Sonny and Cher this morning.
Yes.
I got you, babe. I barely pay attention to that shit. I think it has more to do with like the Warner Brothers, like the movies coming out. I know James Gunn is like heading the I don't know if they call it the DC EU anymore, but I honestly don't care because I don't know if I'm burned out with the movies or they just kind of suck now.
Yeah, let me ask you guys, how do you feel about comic book movies?
Depends on the comic and depends on the movie.
Depends how close they stick to the source material.
A bad comic that got made into a bad movie would be Spawn. that was catastrophic.
The
The
soundtrack was good
X-Men,
of Spawn.
the
Yes.
yeah, the soundtrack was good, but the sorry,
You said the X-Men before I interrupted you.
um, I'm sorry, my brain just like shat out the side of my head.
Oh, that's okay. For being as into comic books as I am, I'm really not super into the movies.
Yeah,
Pretty much any movie. I mean, I like the older Batman movies. The Tim Burton one is my favorite. But I didn't really love The Dark Knight. I thought the first one was okay, but I didn't like the second one. I fell asleep during the third one, and everyone's always like, "Oh, you like comic books like Dark Knight, blah blah blah," and I'm just like, you know.
Uh, and the X-Men stuff was based off of Ultimates, which was like a run in the early aughts.
Yeah,
It was
the
in
X-Men
it was like an
movies.
alternate it was like an alternate universe that like, and then the movies was roughly based on that, and then the movies kind of went in their own direction while Ultimates went in the opposite direction.
You mentioned Spawn. I got defensive there for a second, and I remember reading those books when I was a kid. The art was amazing, but that writing.
Yeah,
Todd
writing.
McFarlane is a great artist. I
Yeah.
am not going to fault him for that. Todd McFarlane is amazing,
yeah,
especially at horror art.
yes.
But
I'm a big fan.
that movie, it was definitely filled with problems. But did you ever catch the HBO animated Spawn series?
I
think
did. I
caught,
forgot
like,
that
one or two.
existed.
That
Oh my
show was
God.
fucking awesome. I put that up there with Batman the Anime Series, Spider-Man, all those 90s cartoons, but it was dark and rated R.
Yeah, I'm thinking about doing a video about the Max cartoon.
Yes.
Because that was like my favorite that's probably my favorite animated comic book thing.
MTV
Yeah.
Oddities?
Yes.
Yes. I actually have issue 1 of the Max from Image.
I do
And,
too.
And
Wow,
yeah,
cool.
and Pitt. Like in the team ups they did, Max and Pitt. Pitt.
Oh, I forgot about Pitt. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow.
That's
Because I mostly the Max and Pitt I saw in like back issues. So, but I read I think most of both of them.
nice. Yeah, I mentioned Todd McFarlane. Yeah, amazing artist, but the writing is, especially was it Spider-Man Torment?
His writing is not great.
But his art makes up for it. I'll write it in my head.
Does it though?
I'll rewrite the story in my head while I'm reading it. Like, this is how I would have did this dialogue, but with this art right here.
Yes. I would love to rewrite Todd McFarlane's work. Just leave the art the way it is and just fill in the blanks.
It would be fucked up if me and you somehow just end up working with him one day and he comes back and he hears this recording. So that's what you guys really think, huh?
Well, at the time, and then I got to know you, and then I came to my senses.
Yeah.
That's not how I am. I don't know what you're speaking of, sir.
No idea what you're talking about.
Let's get back to work.
That kind of goes into another question I had. Favorite artists or writers? It can be anything, any comic book or manga.
Ooh.
Oh my
Chris
God.
Bachalo. I was a really big fan in the late 90s of Chris Bachalo. Wendy Payne, of course. And oh man, who else? Junji Ito for manga. He's the favorite. And they recently came out with a Netflix series that is a comic version or a cartoon version of his comics.
Yes, I've heard it's very, very good, and I really want to watch it.
Very good.
Favorite writers in comics. Oh, there's so many good ones though. I'm sure Frank Miller, Alan Moore, Chris Claremont. Just keep going with
Chris
those.
Claremont.
Chris Claremont.
Like,
Come on, you
the
got.
problem with Chris.
Go ahead.
The problem with Chris is that he reneged on his own stuff all the time.
I guess I'm thinking of Chris Claremont 80s X-Men stuff when I think of him.
Yeah,
the first
that's
thing that
Me
stands out.
too.
I think of that and the New Mutants.
The transition between the 80s and the 90s, he basically did contradicting information of the characters, of the storylines, and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it was good, but it was like, I don't know.
Yeah, writers. But him, Bill Finger, the original writer for Batman. A little biased there. I know his granddaughter.
Hmm.
As far as manga, I'd have to just go with Katsuhiro Otomo, the author of the Great Akira. And I just actually read the 6 books a couple of years ago for the first time, and that was the first time I read a book series. I'm just like, Jesus Christ, that blew me away. And it made me completely forget about the movie, and actually made the movie look like shit, which I originally thought it was
Yes.
amazing from age 13 until my 30s. I was like, no, that's just a truncated mess. This is the real story.
It is a truncated mess.
I've seen the art, but I've never read them. I probably should, considering it's kind of a
Same with
classic.
Battle Royale.
Oh yeah, Battle
Battle
Royale.
Royale was the same way. Like, the movie
I love that
was just
book.
a truncated. The book
What-
is so good.
When I first opened Akira, that first page when it shows Tokyo right before the big blow, that was the first time I ever had a book in my hand and just got the chills. Not only because, it's something I've been a fan of forever and been told to read this, but it's like I already knew there's something fucking crazy waiting for me behind this page. A crazy ass ride. And I was not disappointed.
I felt that way about Battle Angel Alita. Yukiri Kishiro was an amazing, like, he inspires me
He
even
was
today.
an amazing artist. Wait, he wrote it, didn't he? I'm thinking of something
Yeah.
else. Yeah,
Yeah,
who's-
that was
who's
his.
the
That was his
artist?
baby.
I haven't read
Okay.
that.
Yukiri Kishiro. Yeah, his art still inspires me as a comic artist.
I liked the anime a lot, but the comic book is better.
Mhm.
I see, interestingly, I kind of see that style of art coming back a little bit, like in places that I go where people will just post art, like Tumblr, even Instagram sometimes. I'm seeing like
Oh,
the
really?
kind of, yeah, very detailed, very, I'm a writer, I can think of words, but
I don't feel alone
really-
here, finally.
Yeah, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like a mixture of like technology, but it's very organic, but it's also very detailed, and that style seems to be coming back a lot, which makes me really happy because I personally enjoy that. Also, the soundtrack of the anime Battle Angel Alita was really good.
Yes, it was.
I think the best soundtrack is still Samurai Champloo.
I've never heard that.
Samurai Champloo has an archetype that I despise. So I couldn't watch it and take it seriously. So I am offended by the useless vagina. They throw in a female character and basically she is just abrasive. Like, she is completely useless. You could take her out of the show and the show would be better for it.
Yeah, I kind of know what you're talking about. I think about this a lot, and I've talked about this with friends, like being a woman growing up on some of this media, you kind of like didn't really like some of the female characters because they were almost pointless. They were just kind of like
They-
They're
Not even almost like
they were like
like
scenery.
full on like useless.
Yeah, even things that I really liked when I was younger, I kind of read back now and I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I really like this. I remember like my most famous example of this in my past was I hated the woman in Back to the Future 3 because she was worthless and she was always getting into trouble, and I was like, why can't she be cool? But it kind of made up for it now that I watch it when I'm like older. She goes and time travels with the doc and she kind of makes up for it. She's like a cool partner to him, and I feel a little less angry about it. But when I was a girl, I was just like, oh, why aren't there any girls who do cool things? Maybe that's why I got into like magical girls when I was like in middle school. I don't know.
Was
And maybe
Samurai?
Bishojo and Bishojo, I couldn't relate to Bishojo, but like,
What's back to Samurai Champloo for a second? I don't know if I would consider Fu useless. She was kind of like the brains of the operation, the ringleader. She was the one to tell them, "Hey, we need food, we need money. Hey, you guys go do that, make us some money." And at the end, she would collect them both. So they'd go off on their own little shenanigans. Like, all right, you idiots, let's go. At least from the episodes I saw. But yeah, other than that, you know, she like they were the brawn, she was the brains. That's the way I always saw the show. She kind of, you know, led them.
I always wondered why they put up with her shit.
Because they believed in her cause. They wanted to avenge her for the samurai who smells like sunflowers, or whatever they call him.
I didn't watch that much.
I think a lot of it had to do with the two of them. Damn, what's their names? Jean and Mugen. They wanted to kill each other, so like they figured, you know, do this mission together, and at the end we'll have our duel.
Ha.
now I need to watch this to see how I feel about it. I haven't watched a lot of anime recently. I'm very picky about anime.
Me too.
I wish I wasn't.
The last really good anime that I watched was Princess Jellyfish.
I have watched that.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I've watched that. It is good.
Especially
Right now-
those of us who like draw for a living or like geek out about something. And like they were finally a group of girls that I could actually relate to. Even the trans character, like it was eye-opening as far as like shows from Japan were at the time.
I used to be really picky about my anime. I would only like dark and edgy. These days, I'm trying to be more open about it. But at the same time, I keep gravitating towards dark and edgy. Like I started with Spy Fam. I'm like, all right, this is kind of cool. Then I jump right into Death Parade. But since I got Crunchyroll, I've been giving more things a chance because I wouldn't say all anime is good. Some of it's really terrible, but you'd be surprised like how much a title of a show or like the cover will throw you off until you're actually in the story and you're enjoying it. That's how I got in a few of like those slice of life stories, which I tend to avoid.
I'd agree with that because I 100% see the covers of certain animes, and it's just like it's like 50 characters jumping in the air and like one robot, and I'm like, no, I don't think this looks very interesting. So I think I should give it more of a chance. I really should. I have a bad habit, I don't know about you guys, of like watching the same things over and over and over again.
Sometimes.
As in like the genre or the same like content over and over again?
Sometimes the same content over. More as I get older. I don't know if it's just like my brain.
Especially with comics.
Yeah, I need to branch out into more modern comics. I read some independent comics. Like there's definitely some that I really like, but I need to kind of catch up on, especially the X universe. I'm trying to get caught up, but it's a lot to take in.
I would waste money on any DC or Marvel comics nowadays. They all suck.
It's so terrible. I'm trying to read I'm trying to read through The Trials of X, and I'm in the beginning of it with Magneto, and it is not good. It is not good. The art is good.
I think the art looks a lot better than like mid 2000s art.
Mhm.
X-Men Legends. That was like 2019. That was the last Marvel book I bought. But I remember reading that the writing was awful, but the art was amazing. It was like it reminded me of Jim Lee, but different. The way that artist said, I have
Yeah,
it somewhere buried, but I can pull it out eventually.
right
Nice.
on.
That kind of goes into what we were talking about. Kind of goes into another question I had for you guys. What is a comic or storyline that has really affected you deeply, or really made you think, or really upset you? Something that really affected you the most?
The intro of Quanin, like basically the birth of Psylocke as an Asian woman, was really influential. The story with Winnowill in ElfQuest was really influential, and there were plenty of like scenes in Sandman that really like kind of got me like, ugh. Especially the scene where I mean, I haven't watched the rest of the series on Netflix yet. I've only seen 1 or 2 episodes, but in the comic there was a convention of psychopaths
It's in the show.
where that the Corinthian was like, I'm totally gonna go to this because it's awesome that we can geek out about this thing. And I was like, I hope that's not a real thing. That would be terrible if it was a real thing.
Yeah, those are good answers.
Well, just in case you're wondering, they put that part in the series. It's like either the second to last episode or it's the finale with the big convention. Like, yes, we're all Americans here looking for our dreams. That was awesome. But when it comes to me, V for Vendetta. Because I remember reading that at a young age, and that was the first. I was at that age where I was starting to like kind of break away from convention and like seeing the world, the government for what it is. And then reading that book is like, holy crap. You mentioned Sandman though. There's one where I forget which arc it is, where he's following his sister around Death for the day, which is also in the series, but they cut this part out, and it always bothered the hell out of me. Death visits this older man, probably like middle aged, around that, but he's laying in his bed, and she's like, "All right, your time to go." He's like, "I'm not that old yet. You know, there's still time. I still have plenty of life yet. You know, this is unfair." And she's like, "Unfair?" Well, I'm butchering the dialogue. She didn't say it like this, but like, "Unfair. You had a chance at life. You got life. Some don't. Some die before they're born. You know, or they come out stillborn. You got what years you have, and you should be grateful for it. You had a
Yeah,
life."
I feel like in the show they kind of like mixed. They kind of like, they didn't show that character, but they kind of had the same message with the guy who was very elderly, and the first, I think it was the first person they visit, who passes away, and he's like, "Oh, I guess it is my time," but he's kind of like, "No, I'm not ready yet," at first, and then they show the baby, and the baby passes away, and it's like probably only a few-week old baby. So I think they were trying to do that without showing too many. But yeah, I remember that part in the comic book, and it was pretty intense.
On Her Wings is the name of the chapter
Do you guys
in the comic.
remember, for Sandman, was it a special death episode, or was it actually part of the main series where she's talking to that boy in the attic?
No, the boy in the attic was a offshoot.
That's what I thought. I just couldn't remember if it was part of the actual comic.
Sexton, I think. Sexton,
Yeah.
I think was his name. That was the high cost of
Cost of
living.
living.
Yes. Oh, okay. Yes. I haven't read the Sandman comics in probably like 10 years. So,
The High Cost of Living, which Gaiman has been working on a movie for like forever. And
Yep.
then
Well, I
it
think
was
the
in
biggest
this
problem he
book.
has, suicide has always been controversial, and that's what starts off with that, teen boy wanting to end his life, and she kind of, doesn't tell him to stop, but she kind of stumbles into his life, annoying, at least breaking him from that, thought pattern, and drags him along on some adventures through the whole comic. But yeah, it starts with the young
Mhm.
boy wanting to take his own life, and I think like suicide's always been so controversial. It's kind of hard to put up in a movie. That's like all those 80 movies kind of like skirted around the issue.
Mhm.
that's true. Yeah.
High Cost of Living, and
That was a good book.
but what was the other book? There was a second Death series that was like 3 issues.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I can't remember what it was called.
I have
Now that
At
I'm like,
Death's Door.
The Time of Your Life.
Time of Your Life.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I didn't read that one, but I'm familiar with it.
It's so good.
I
So
found
good.
that like used in a bookstore, and I was like, yoink, I'm
Oh,
taking this because it was really cheap.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Heck
found
yeah.
the High Cost of Living, all 3 issues on Mercari for like $15.
That's the thing we should talk about is um 80s, 90s, 2000s, probably up until like Amazon became very big. Do you guys remember how hard it was to find whole series or whole collections of a storyline
Yes.
in back issue? It was
I
so hard. Oh my gosh.
I relied on my comic distributor
You had a
to hook me
distributor.
up with
Wow.
an entire story. To hook me up with an entire story, I would talk to my buddy Chris, who owned a comic book store, and like I. Mm,
Yeah, because I mostly read back issues, so I would have to go and like seek them out. And I remember like so many times when I was like younger, I would just have to call around the city to all the different comic book stores and be like, "Do you
oh,
have X-Men number 168 or whatever it was?" And they're
mhm.
probably just like, "Oh my god, this like literal child is asking for these." Another question I had for you guys is, you guys kind of talked about this a little bit, but have you ever made your own comics or written fan fiction about comic properties?
Yes to both. I have a webcomic called Hotaru. It is about a Japanese American firefighter turned vampire and then thrown into the proverbial wood chipper that is vampire politics. It is running right now, and by the time this episode comes out, it will probably be wrapping up.
I'll put a link to it below.
I've written a bunch of comics, one of which will be my magnus opus. Excuse me, it's a zombie book, but I wanted the zombie craze to kind of die down a little bit before I tried drawing it, and I wanted to become a better artist, before I attacked that story.
The first story I tried writing was a Batman story when I was 6 years old, before I was even reading anything. I couldn't even spell Gotham City. That didn't last long. And I was actually on a really old typewriter from my grandmother. That was my first attempt at storytelling. Of course, it was Batman. Attempt at writing comics. I'm actually working on my first one right now, a script for a graphic novel I'm writing. And I pretty much teach myself how to script write while doing it. I've read a couple of books, but one of them is for
It's
movie
different
scripting, which
for
was
every book. Yeah.
yes. And it's funny you mentioned Magnus Opus. This is kind of what this is turning into. It's a big epic story. And for my first comic, whatever. I'll either write it right or not. But it's one of those big epic stories, though, definitely.
I like having a story like that and then giving it a few years to like percolate and then come back to it with fresh eyes and a better skill set and just like make it better as the years go by. Like, especially when it comes to scripting, at what point do I determine that I am good enough to actually take on the story, and the story finished enough for me to do that?
I've had this story in my head since October of 2021. And I just started
Hmm.
writing it about a few months ago. Well, not a few months ago. God, the end of last year. I started getting on it pretty hard. But yeah, I was letting it just get together. I was doing research because it's based in World War One, and it's about wolves attacking both the German side and the Russian side on the Eastern Front.
Nice.
A lot of research there into that horrible war in that cold ass region in the middle of the winter.
I am intrigued.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I'm not going to say I enjoy war because that sounds messed up, but I think learning about war is fascinating. Um, so I will definitely have to check that out. Do you guys, I should mention all three of us are writers, and that's kind of how we came together.
Hmm.
Do you guys think that growing up reading comic books helped your writing, or do you think it was a little bit difficult to switch from like a comic book medium to, like, let's say a novel or a short story, because you're missing that visual element when you're just writing like a book or a novel? What do you guys think about that?
I feel like reading the epics in comic form really informed me how to um, handle dialogue and narration and point of view and all of that stuff. So I think I think my I'm sorry, I I get like halfway into a thought and then what was I saying?
You were talking about how you think that having those elements of the comic books in your mind kind of did help you write things.
I branched, yeah, to kind of touch on the last question a little bit. I went into fan fiction first, like X-Men fan fiction, which I still have, which is amazing. When I was in high school, I started writing like I started role playing X-Men and making those role plays into stories, and then I started making stories about other content, and then I started working on a novel. So, like, the transition definitely originated via reading comics. Absolutely.
As a reader, I'd say it helped me with visualizing better. So when I'm reading something, I almost picture it by panel with each scene. I kind of do that with a lot of books still. Like I can almost envision it with a comic. I think I just picked up the habit from there. As far as writing goes, to a degree, but writing a comic book strip is basically just all telling, no showing. Which from my point of view, I guess, and also I used to have a big problem with just telling when I first started writing. So like maybe that's why like I kind of overcompensated a little bit by overshowing on my first drafts too when I was pointed out by it. So it's kind of been like trying to find a decent mixture. But for me, it just feels like writing a strip just all telling. It's kind of falling back in old habits. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I actually kind of agree with both of you. I think in some ways it really did help. Like, one thing that I think reading comic books and starting to read comic books more again has helped with is pacing. Um,
Yes.
Pacing in comic books is often, because it has to be so concise, I think that it really helped me to kind of look at these stories. And as I don't know if you guys know, but my channel isn't out yet, but it will be when this comes out. But basically, I'm rereading a lot of old comic books and kind of looking back at old media from when I was like a child and a teenager in my early 20s to just kind of, it's been a couple years, so I just wanted to look back on it, and that's kind of what I'm doing. And from rereading all these comics, I'm like, wow, these storylines are so neat and precise, and there's I was actually kind of shocked because, like, my mind kind of, when I was a child, filled in more details, and the plots are just so snappy and well written. I mean, that's the sign of a good writer, of course, but, um, so I think that reading comics helps with pacing, and I do think it helps you kind of, when you're a writer, to have a I mean, it definitely helps to have a picture in your head. I would hope most people who are writers would have a picture in their head, but maybe some don't.
I actually know a couple of writers who aren't visualizers. Like, they don't see a picture and they don't see a movie in their head while they're writing. They literally, like, come at it from a technical standpoint, and then they try to come up with words that would plug into that formula.
That's so interesting because that's not at all how I think, and I
That's
guess I
not
just
at all how
assumed.
I think.
Yeah, I guess I
Exactly.
assumed that everybody thought that way, but I guess not. But I do think that comics, yeah, I would agree also that they are a lot of telling because there's, of course, like like there's little descriptions in comic books, like from last issue or at the mall where the kids join, or the blackbird is this, there's little like exposition things, but it is a lot of telling. I would agree with that too. So yeah, I can see both sides of it.
When I'm writing, it's different visualizing when I'm reading. I do get the picture there, but it's more faint, almost like a shadow, a ghost. At least when I'm going over my first draft. Maybe after that I can come back and fatten it up a little bit. And it's funny how people always say I'm okay with my descriptions. Where like I guess maybe I think I just see things clearer and I focus on that when I'm describing a setting. So I don't have to get into full detail about everything else. I kind of just hint at everything else. Maybe that's just my lack of imagination. I don't know. But when people try telling me there's no good writing in comics, I always point them towards the story arc Craven's Last Hunt by John DeMatteis and Mike Zeck from like '87, because that was like
Oh, yeah.
straight up like this deep, almost existential, almost my ass, existential story, very like similar like something you'd read from like Fyodor Dostoevsky. And yeah, I was like, I think what, 6 books maybe. But anyways, that story there is a masterpiece, I think.
Um, I really liked Black Orchid by, it was by Marvel, I think, because the heavy bad guy was Kingpin. The art was painted for an entire book, and then the story was basically that um, this woman took on a superhero sort of thing. It was like an offshoot of Swamp Thing, I think. She wanted vengeance against Kingpin. And it kind of like goes into the machinations that were in her head at the time. That was probably the first really well scripted comic that I came across, was Black Orchid.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you guys this: is there a character you hate for
Oh my
any
god.
reason?
Oh
Maybe
my
your
god.
most hated character?
I have gotten into arguments with other artists that I am not a Cyclops fan, and
I'm
they
not either.
usually come at me with like, well, Psylocke is freaking useless, and like, I hate Psylocke. So uh I think they call themselves Sophie Ross these days. I met them at a small press expo in Maryland, and I was like, "Oh my god, I am standing next to the artist that I admire most in contemporary comics," and uh, we got into arguing about X-Men, and they were like, "How about you draw a picture of Psylocke that would inspire me to like her? And I will draw a Cyclops that will inspire you to like him." And he did like a quickie little Sharpie sketch, and I did this like Art Nouveau like pencil drawing like in the hallway, and he was like, "Holy crap!" So
Nice.
like Cyclops, I get into lots of arguments about. There are tons of Marvel villains that were just atrocious. Holy cannoli. How do I pick?
I was trying to think of that myself too, and I'm trying to think of like what I've read in the comics that just really pissed me off. I'd have to go with Comet the Super Horse that Supergirl wrote for a while. Maybe it's because I'm a guy, but Crypto was better. He's a good boy.
I'd agree with that. I would, yeah.
But otherwise, I try to give everyone a chance. Even that one, the Matter Eater fellow from the '60s comics, want to be like eating like chain link fences and shit.
Yeah.
I think there have been comic book characters, I don't know about you guys, that I like hate, but then like a different writer or artist takes over. Just like you were saying, Sako, with like comparing like pictures to have them like you. And with Cyclops, I think that's a product of us kind of growing up on the animated series, because he's a super nerd in the animated series, like more
He's the
so
Boy
than
Scout.
more
He's-
so than in the comics.
He's kind of like Superman without the cool powers.
Yeah. I was shocked when I saw that Cyclops had killed Professor Xavier, but then I read why and I was like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." So I've been
I
trying to catch
missed
up on those.
that. I
Oh
missed
yeah.
that entirely.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Like I hadn't read comics for like 5 or 6 years, and I went back and that had happened and everything was like totally different, and I was just like, whoa, I really need to start over, and like kind of like, because I had two things that happened that kind of stopped me from collecting like comic books past a certain point. One of them was one of the people who got me into, hold on, I'm being attacked by a cat. One of the people who got me into comics was like, oh, don't read the X-Men past the point where Jim Lee leaves. So
Oh, I get that.
I didn't really read too much after that, and I kind of just did the 70s, 80s run and maybe a little bit of the early 90s. But I forget where I was going with this. But yeah, we grew up on the animated series, and I think Cyclops was a nerd in that. And yes, Superman is like kind of a nerd too.
He's an OP nerd.
Yeah. You kind of have to love him because like he's the one who kind of paved the way for a lot of like male comic books, because comic books were not super male focused back when they were originally out. There was a lot of female comic books, and from what I understand, like Detective Comics and horror comics were the way that most men got into comics before, the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and everybody came out. That's just my understanding, though. I'm gonna have to look into that more.
No, that makes total sense.
Well, you mentioned reading up after Jim Lee left to go to Image. To be fair, Marvel got really bad there in the 90s for a while. After the
art
mid-90s.
was terrible.
Yeah, it was like fucking cereal box comic art.
Yeah, it was very bad. Like I started like collecting those. Like I was like, oh, I'll give it a chance, and I like bought the back issues from like the mid '90s after Jim Lee left, and there was just these exaggerated, like huge mouths and
Foxy.
weird. boxy bodies. Yeah, it was very strange.
Okay, so like Bachalo's like art style was very like square and boxy. Um so I totally get that some people aren't going to appreciate that style as much as I do. It was the trial of Gambit in the 90s, with Rogue basically realizing that Gambit was present during the raid by Sinister back in the day.
Yeah.
I loved the art, but I totally get how people would be like, man, compared to Jim Lee, this is garbage.
Yeah.
Like, I get it.
Yeah, I just feel like Jim Lee is
That
on
was a high
another
bar.
level. Yeah.
It was a high bar.
There's some comic book artists who I definitely think are as good as him, but they're stylistically very different than him.
Mm-hmm.
He just is very good at what he did, and even his stuff with Image was really good, but I tried collecting a couple things from Image and just the writing wasn't there. The art was always
Agreed.
beautiful, but like the writing, other than like
Michael
Gen
Turner.
13 and the Max.
Michael Turner. Like, he was a goddamn saint. He was writing Fathom from a hospital bed. He got like terminally ill from something, and he was like, I'm so sorry, issue 4 is gonna come out kind of late this month because I'm going through treatment and I'm in a hospital. And so he was doing nothing but drawing comics in the hospital, and I was like, I cannot fault his art being like sliding down in quality. Like,
Oh yeah, being that sick.
being that sick, like he basically drew comics till he died.
Damn.
And like, I value the Witchblade stuff, the Darkness, the Fathom. Like, there's a special
Witchblade
place
was good, yeah.
they hold a special place in my heart because like the artist was so good.
You mentioned, working even though ill, or unhealthy or whatever. What was his name? Yoshihiro Togashi, the author of Hunter x Hunter. Yeah, I guess like he has such
Hunter
severe
X
back
Hunter.
problems. Yeah, is it Hunter x Hunter or Hunter x Hunter? I always just say
Hunter
that.
X Hunter, yeah.
Well, anyways, he has really bad back problems, I guess, from just the sedentary lifestyle of being at a desk, either gaming or drawing, and like he's trying to like all these different procedures or whatever, and also like trying to draw while lying down. But I guess it's so bad, no new stuff's coming out, and that's why the anime has been on hold for such a long time. And it's like, what can you do in that situation? He wants to keep going, but can't even sit up.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. A couple of manga and anime that I really like. One of them, Fruits Basket, I believe. The creator was in a car accident, I think, and couldn't draw for a while, so there was nothing new for a really long time.
Yeah.
It's too bad. Let me ask you guys this: do you have any favorite mutant memories or best memories you had with the X universe, or maybe your favorite storyline, or whatever you feel really just brought you joy?
The downtime with the X-Men where they did like team building exercises, like playing baseball or volleyball or whatever, those scenes in the comics always brought me joy. Like, watching them interact with each other, and that's, I think, where my like communication stuff, like dialogue tips and stuff like that, came from, was like how Wolverine interacted with all the ladies, and like especially Storm, and like the character development that happened during those downtime scenes was so valued to me.
I 100% agree. That was my very favorite thing, especially when I was younger. I think just maybe because I didn't really know how the world worked yet, and I kind of looked to comics to see how people interact. I was very shy and very awkward, and I think it was like I had these friends that I could just watch their lives, and I kind of picked up, like, how people were, right or wrong, from comic books, and it really
Right.
made me feel more connected, and especially when they were humanized like that, it really meant a lot to me. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah.
When it comes to like memories from the X-Men books that reverberated from me, I can think of two situations. One is with Wolverine and the thing with him and Jean, but also like would branch off from it, like the rapport he had with Jean and Scott's kids, Nathan and Hope, like they had their own thing going on. Like I don't know, like how do I explain this? You know how I know I'm having a brain fart. Excuse me. It'll
That's
pass.
okay. We're doing it live, so like it's gonna happen.
Well, it's kind of like how Jean saw the good in Logan, and also how like I guess her children saw the good and they had their own relationship with him. They also liked him. They saw what she saw in him, and he had a good relationship with them. I don't know. I always kind of felt that. I don't know why, but then there's also God, I can't even remember who wrote it. When Wolverine went to the past to talk to Xavier, and he was like trying to argue. First Xavier's like, "You're fucking crazy. Get the fuck away from me, man." And, like he said something to him because you saw him like, "Look, one day you're gonna start the X-Men and try to push mutants in a better direction." And he was arguing back and forth. Wolverine said something, and when Xavier responded, he's like, "Oh, by the way, I didn't say that part out loud. You read my mind." It was like, "Oh shit." Because he was trying to pretend like he couldn't read his mind. There we go. That was part of it. He was pretending like he didn't have any powers. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, stranger. Get away from me. And then he caught him up. He was like, "Yeah, I didn't say that last part out loud. You read that." And I just remember being like, "Damn." But yeah.
Yeah. I really think Wolverine is such a popular character because he has so many different facets to him. Like he's a tough guy with claws, he'll fight you, like he's angry, but he has this soft spot for people like Shadowcat and Jubilee and like you said, like Nathan and Hope. Like he's kind of very kind and sweet to a lot of people.
Yes. And also, he remembers everything outside of time loops, right?
Yes.
So he remembers what things were like before. Revenge versus Psylocke, for instance. When Quanon showed up to the X Mansion and everybody was like, "Who the hell is this bitch?" And Wolverine was like, "That's Psylocke. Definitely. She smells the same. Like, totally her." And it was because Wolverine vouched for her that she was allowed to stay. And then when they investigated, was it Shinobi Shaw? His mansion, they found like a naked picture of Quanon. And they're like, so how do you explain that? And then that was like next time on X-Men.
Sako, how did you feel that Cyclops and Psylocke had a fling? How did that make you feel? Knowing that you hate Cyclops.
She used him like tissue.
Yes,
like,
she did.
She just like was herself, and Cyclops was like, "Oh, telepath who's super hot." While Jean was there,
He has a type.
he has a type. Sabretooth had the same like fetish. Like they needed the glow, which is why Sabretooth and Psylocke had like this weird sexual tension.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, that got weird.
Yeah. I felt I remember that was like when he cheated on Jean, I was just like, nope, you're done. Like, I didn't like you
I
anyways,
didn't like him
and
anyways. Yeah.
I think you're super annoying, and now you've done this. But weirdly, I didn't blame Psylocke at all. I was just like, no, she's just being hot and being
She's
herself.
just being hot. She came out of the water in a bathing suit and her
Yeah,
hair all slicked down and her boobs all shiny and he was like, "Go."
yeah. I
It
was,
happens.
yeah,
Sitting next to Jean.
yeah,
Yeah, see, you shouldn't do it, especially if you're a woman can already read your fucking mind.
Like,
yeah.
oh my
Right.
God.
He's playing some dangerous games there with two telepaths.
I think
And
he wants to be as
and
vulnerable as possible.
Psylocke flirted back. Like
She
there was
totally
a
did.
moment where Psylocke was like, "Oh, really? Hmm, really?"
I
And
remember
then
I like read that when I was like 13, and I was like, oh my, scandalous.
scandalous, yeah. That was my first scandal for sure. Was Cyclops going at like fondling over Psylocke. Yeah, that definitely.
To go back to that early 2000s art, I'm a lot more into it now than I was when I originally tried to read it.
Mhm.
It's not bad. Like, I think for me personally, I think I was like very judgmental as a child with art, and I refused to see that art could be different and it didn't all have to look like kind of the same. Not that I liked all the same artists, they were all vastly different, but I kind of like I would pick something and be like, "Well, I don't like that, so I don't think it's art." Now I'm like, "Well, I might not like it, but it's still art and it still takes talent to create." So I to go back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, like I am way more into the art than I used to be.
Ooh,
Oh,
you
Whoa,
okay?
sorry.
I'm dizzy.
Sandman, there was like a type of art that I thought was terrible, but the story was so good that I kind of like looked past the art to the to to the story, to Neil Gaiman's masterpiece that was like World's End and stuff like that. World's End, the art was not my style, but like having a restaurant at the end of the universe, like kind of rad.
Yeah, it's kind of awesome.
It's kind of awesome.
I'm trying to think of a story where I liked the writing, but the artwork wasn't that great. I did go with Sin City. I mean, it's
Yes.
Yeah,
gritty,
I'd
but
agree with that.
it's meant to be gritty. But I remember that reading that at probably too young of an age. But even thinking like, this is weird artwork, but I love this dialogue.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
agree. I That's one comic movie too that I didn't hate. It was pretty good.
I think it had the noir feel to it. Like, I wasn't a fan of his art in Sin City, like the comic. It was given to me as a reference for the kind of style that I was supposed to be doing Hotaru in. And
Oh yeah, that would be hard. And you're like, I don't really like this.
I don't really like this. So I bought a book that actually says how to make noir comics. And it talked about how to use shadow and like what kind of characters would be in a noir comic, and like basically hints and tips about how to set up your scenes and how to set up your chapters and stuff like that. So that was a big help, like super big help. But just reading Sin City, I was like, there are shocks of red, there are shocks of yellow, depending on the book that you were reading. And uh, the anatomy was poor. The execution
Yeah.
was excellent. Don't get me wrong. The execution was excellent, but his poor pencils were terrible.
Reading it made me feel
Often
like I was colorblind in some areas, except for red and yellow.
Mhm.
another thing is I find that there's a lot of comics I've read that it wasn't the penciling, it wasn't the art itself, but the inking was so bad at certain
Mhm.
points. Like there's certain X-Men comics and the Mutants comics and even like and they kind of cleaned it up by from what I can tell, like the early 2000s, but around the 80s, it might just be the reprints that I have are poor. Um, I don't
Do you have,
know.
like, X-Men Classic or anything like that? Like, those.
I have like the omnibus; those are pretty good. But there was these other X Men books, collected books that came out probably in 2012, and
Oh,
they were just not good. Like people, you could just tell they weren't copied well.
there was a stint where they stopped inking. When digital art became the norm for coloring comics, they went through, like, a month or 2 of no inker.
Yeah, because I'm thinking also that might be part of the problem that I have with it is like the digital art. I love digital art, but sometimes it comes off kind of cold to me.
There was You know what? There was, like, a 2-month period where they just stretched the detail on the pencils and excuse me. They stretched the detail on the pencils and, just colored on top of it. Like, they didn't even multiply the layers, like,
Uh,
they just freaking did Photoshop right on top of it. So, like, it kind of, like, influenced a weird phase in my life where I didn't all I had to do was, like, really clean pencils, and then I wouldn't have to ink. But I have learned that inking really is necessary, like.
have you?
On Oh,
Uh,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna change the subject. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, this is a quick question, kind of about what we're talking about. Would you read a comic book that the art was completely created in AI?
If it was free.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, same. Have,
It's the monetization of AI that I have a problem with. If someone makes if authors want to use AI to make a cover, they better offer that book for free.
Same. Also, principles are behind it too. I think a lot of things nowadays, especially in art, is already fake and unoriginal. Why should we keep going in that direction with AI? Because that's all it is. All it is just ripping off somebody else. It's not creating its own talent.
Correct.
I definitely think there is something to be said about learning the craft of making art and the process. And I do like some AI art, and I've seen it used in an interesting way. For instance, there's this one Instagram I follow where I think it's a he. He makes fake photographs and then
Oh.
writes little captions underneath them. Like Billy wasn't mad that his mom took this picture because he was happy it was his birthday, and it would be like you would swear it was a real image of like a person. So it's kind of uncanny
Um,
valley, but it's also very interesting. Um, Also, I saw on Instagram that Bill Sienkiewicz recently came out against AI art. He drew a picture of a middle finger like being stuck up, but there was like 40 fingers on the hand, so he was making fun of how AI can't seem to handle hands. But
yeah,
he came out about that, and it
I'll be
was
right
that's
back.
cool.
all right.
Okay, that was cool.
Yeah, so I was reading that the other day, and I was just like, well, because I was kind of curious what like some of the bigger artists thought of it, and yeah, he kind of made his feelings known, and he is an artist that I look up to quite a bit. So
Mm-hmm. Right on.
yeah.
my head is swimming with comic topics.
Comic topics. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back, and really where I stopped collecting was like 2000, 2001 issues to
They
like
were
2009. I didn't read any of those issues.
I tried. That was basically when they tried rebooting the X-Men after the movie came out. And like Ultimates came out, which was a totally like different universe. Like they redefined Nick Fury, for instance. Like I was like, this is awful. Psylocke's on the cover and looking awful, and the book is awful. And it kind of like disenfranchised me with Marvel as a company. Because when I was in 5th grade, I was like, I'm going to be an artist for Marvel. And then I hit my teens, and the movie had just come out, and they were changing the X-Men for a new audience, was their excuse. And I was
Unhappy.
to say the least. Yeah, that word works.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the movies. They aren't the worst movies I've ever seen, but I don't really find them particularly
Offensive.
good.
They're not good. I was so offended by the X-Men movie.
Oh, those. I liked X too.
I didn't mind Days of Future Past, even though it was nothing like Days of Future Past. Well,
Nothing.
it was a little bit, but not what I expected. But I just tried to view it as its own thing, separate from the comic books, and I was able to enjoy it for that reason. But I still haven't seen
tried.
Dark Phoenix. My friend said it's not as bad as everybody says it is, but that it's bad.
It's bad.
It's really bad. I would say it's bad as they say it is. Just right the first 5 minutes of that movie, you're like, oh, this is trash.
Yeah,
The cartoon handled the Dark Phoenix saga better.
Yes.
Yeah, they did a really good job with that. I remember seeing that and then wanting to read it, and then going and trying to find all the back issues. Things really got a lot easier once I was able to get things online, but like at first I couldn't get things
bless the
online.
internet. God bless the internet.
I'm trying to remember Days of Future Past in the books. And that, like, it went over, a couple of decades, because I remember, like, in the 90s reading some of it. I think Jim Lee actually did the art of it. It was when Hope had the Phoenix Force. And that was, like, part of it, like, her and,
Yes.
what's her, Nathan Richards were supposed to hook up. The son of Reed and Susan.
Yes. That I just recently read, probably about a couple years ago, because I didn't collect those for a time, and I just recently started kind of getting more into that. And there was a crossover that I really liked, but I can't. It's escaping me now. My brain is mush.
That's okay. We're all of our brains are super mushy right now.
I had to actually double check. I'm like, it is Nathan Richards, right? I'm not thinking of Nathan, Cable. But yeah.
Nate Summers, I think, was.
Yeah, there's Nate Summers and Nathaniel Richards.
Nate Gray was Cable's boy. No, Nate Gray was Jean and Scott's boy.
What did you think of Cable and Deadpool 2?
Yeah. I was not offended.
I thought Josh Brolin did a great job.
Considering I hate Cable, that is my probably most hated character. I know that's super unpopular, and I'm not really fond of Deadpool either. I'm okay with it. Like, the movies are fine, but in the comics, just wasn't my thing. But I think they did a good job.
They changed him. He used to be the anti-hero, and then he turned basically the Bugs Bunny of Marvel.
Yeah.
Yeah, his first appearance was actually in New Mutants.
Yeah.
And he wasn't funny. Well, kind of.
Not
But
well, yeah.
I loved that in his own comic, he broke the fourth wall all the time,
like Bugs Bunny.
like Bugs Bunny.
Yeah, well, I'll probably have to go. We'll wrap things up. But if you guys want to talk about, we've touched upon this a little bit, but if you guys just want to talk about the projects you're working on now that people can check out, and of course I'll put all of your socials in the description of this video when it goes up so people can find you. So if you just want to talk about your projects or maybe where to find you, that would be great.
Cool. Hi, folks. I am Sako Tumi, also known as Psycho Sako. You can Google either of those names and find my social media. I cultivate my social media very carefully. And
Good.
I am working, sorry about that. I am working on a comic called Hotaru, the comic series, hotaru.thecomicseries.com. It will wrap up. It'll wrap up in March. I have been uploading the pages every day, every work day, so that I can have like some kind of proof on the internet of what I've done for the past like 9 years. So pleased to be checking.
Yeah, Sako is an amazing artist and a really good writer, and she writes books as well. So I'll also have links to those.
Oh, thanks.
You're cool, Sako.
Oh.
This is RC Scott. I'm an indie horror writer. I can be found on Facebook. I can be found on Twitter at the RC Scott. I can be found on Instagram at the RC Scott Official. All because there's a very friendly elderly chap named RC Scott who used to write science fiction stories back in the day, but I'm not going to hold it against him. I just released on Tuesday my novella Skin Auction. I would advise picking it up at the same time. Viewer beware. It's a disturbing story. Currently working on many projects right now. Plenty of outlines, and what I'm actually starting on is the script for my graphic novel, and hoping to finish that sometime soon. Kind of piecing together this one big story that's kind of getting bigger and bigger the more I research it. And I'm also on YouTube, where I'll stream semi-regularly. And I'm going to start recording stuff, podcasting, and music journaling, and I guess gaming now. I just uploaded or installed Batman Arkham City. I can't wait to tear into that.
Oh, it's very good.
It's so good.
So good. All right.
Isn't
well,
that the
I'm
second
really.
one?
Yep.
It is, yes.
Sweet.
Yeah, I'm really glad you guys came. I had a lot of fun talking to you guys. I
Thanks.
always love talking to comic people. It's so fun, and I'm glad that I got to ask all my questions, and I'm really happy that I got to talk. Well, we should all definitely talk again, maybe on one of your channels.
Well, I
Yeah,
was going
for
to say,
sure.
comic books, even in arguing, it's probably one of the last few places of healthy arguments where you
That's
can still argue
true.
about stuff and be friends. Walking out of the
Debate.
those Wednesday release days, you'd be in there with a bunch of people and just straight shouting matches, almost as bad as the arcade.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll let you guys go. Thank you, everybody. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Ashling out. Bye-bye.